Thank you. Thank you, Mo. Thanks very much for coming, and particularly late in the day. So I hope I keep you entertained, or at least awake, and hopefully we'll have a nice, interesting session. So before I begin, it is a protocol for me as a person living in Australia to pay my respects to the traditional custodians on the land that I live on and work on, and that are the Turrbal people up in Queensland. And so I just would really like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging of those peoples, and voice how fortunate I feel to be able to live and work on that land that was never ceded. So today we're going to talk about city birds and city children. But primarily the presentation is about a methodology. So it will be the focus of what I'm going to talk about today. And there will be a little bit of participation, experimentation, and trialing of the method. And then hopefully that will give you some, because I think that's a useful way for you to perhaps understand how this method works and how it might work for you if you wanted to try it beyond the conclusion of this presentation. I've put a number of codes here, but essentially if you're interested in how I use the mapping beyond what I can talk about today, this, for those of you who may not know, means Instagram. So that's my Instagram page, all right? So it's LK Inefficient Urban Maps. And if you want to find me on Instagram, that's my artist page, okay? So, and you'll find whenever I post a map, that's where it goes. Email, and then this is a more in-depth kind of, that's my personal webpage. So please do write those down if you want. Okay, so what will happen in the session is I'll read a little bit, and then we're going to watch a bit of video, and then I'll talk a bit more. And then we're going to have a little bit of an experimentation with a process of mapping, and then we'll have a discussion. So that will be the order of events. Okay, so city birds, city children, using arts-based methods to explore our belonging to place. So I'm going to discuss how arts-based methods can translate our everyday urban relationships and community into posthuman theories of research practice. That's an odd sentence, because often it's said the other way around, okay? Often we start with the theory, and we think about the most kind of well-serving method to work with that theory or the idea or the speculation or the hypothesis. But I've purposely reversed it. I'll reread it. How arts-based methods can translate our everyday urban relationships and community into post-human theories of research practice. And that's what I'd like you to kind of just bear in mind as I talk through the ideas. And that's not because I'm trying to revert the researching process. It's merely to keep the notion that this talk is about a methodology, a new methodology, and I'd like that to be foregrounded in your mind today as I go through my talk. So what we're going to do is focus on the non-human to extend our thinking about who, what, and how is an urban community. We'll watch a video of starling murmurations to explore starling expression. Not the song of the birds, but the expression in their wings as they move in unison, tracing their pathway across the sky. Starlings move together through a globular, swooping, swooshing, interrelational, and interactive choreography as they pulse amongst each other and as they move as a collective across the sky. Watching the complex movements of the starling murmurations will help us to experiment with an arts-based method of inefficient mapping. And I'll explain more about what that term means in a while. We'll trace the movements and gestures of the bird collaboratories, mapping their choreographies. We'll work together and layer our mappings to create a meshwork of interwoven lines. The arrangements of these maps create a complex assemblage of bird movement, sound, and community, and will prompt our speculative thinking about multi-species presences, citizenship, and of bird-child relations in our cities and towns. So I explore play as a community builder in urban places. My use of the term urban relates to the cities, towns, and neighborhoods of the world, across climates, demographies, geographies, and affluences. My use of the term play is also diverse. I think about play as an enactment, response, communication, exchange, performance, by humans, non-human animals, and inhuman matter. I theorize play to form new conceptualizations about urban communities from a post-human reading. And I ask, how is an urban community? My work considers play and community building in relation to the ethics of urban demarcations and planning. What you're seeing are some of the mappings I've been making over some time. I will switch backwards and forwards through these images. So the literature on the benefits to play, of play to children, of course, most of you would know this is significant, especially in early childhood. Early childhood play literature can focus on particular issues, including the benefits of play to aid social development and physical and mental well-being, the problematics of gendered play, and how play helps build relationships with place and nature. Advocacy for urban play provision can hinge on futures discourses about urban population statistics and pathologizing discourses of children disconnected from physical activity and face-to-face social interaction. Humanist play research may have differing contexts and be interpreted through different paradigms, but the consensus is that play is innate and vital for us. But play is not only a human capacity. Ethological studies help extend humanist notions of play to examine how non-human animal play in its various forms offers a distraction for pets in the domestic sphere, as well as animals living in capture. Animals living in the wild are also seen to possess the capacities for generating and experiencing play, creativity, and pleasure. Any of you who are on Facebook or social media will often see these little videos of happy cows when they've been released from, milking stalls and so on. Ethological research often claims to provide a window into the play capacities and habits of non-human animals, although the preference for behaviorist or positivist readings tend toward notions that animal play is like, akin to, or a version of the acts and motivations for human play, and that's not always strictly true. Existing literature recognizes the need to advance and extend our limited understandings of why and how play occurs. Paying attention to play helps enrich conceptions about relationalities and expressions in humans and animals that extend beyond a hierarchical reading of human and animal binaries. Critical thinking about play beyond a humanist focus helps to expand concepts and ideas about non-human animal play as much more complex than it being a mirror or facsimile of, or for the same purposes as, human play. So at this point, I'm going to get us to watch the murmuration. And there's no sound to this one, okay? And as you're watching, I just want you to think about what I've just said about non-human animal play. So we will watch more of this in a little while. So just be thinking now about how we might think about play in that broader sense, rather than perhaps the fixations we might have had or the understandings we might have had on human play and certainly child play. So what I want you to think about now is this question. How can arts-based methods help to transfer theorizations into research activity? This is something I've been working on, and the reason I developed my method of inefficient mappings as a speculative, arts-based methodology to complement these post-theoretical questions and speculations. The mappings, some of which you're seeing here, bring arts practices and speculative theories together through critical, creative praxis, and are a geontologic methodology for theorizing on urban life in the Anthropocene. And geontologic means it's how we kind of come to know, or the truths that we form about the places where we are, the places that we live, the land, the sky, the sea, the kind of, the living spaces that we inhabit. So if you hear that word, it generally means that. And the rise in speculative research, speculative in this context means, we're not aiming towards answering a question or a hypothesis. We kind of really are, imagine going through a maze in the dark. We're just feeling our way consistently, trying to kind of push what might happen in the future without really knowing what that might be at the outset. It's a very common kind of condition for creating for artists. A lot of artists create speculative works. They have an idea or a kind of hunch, if you like, or a gut feeling, and they just go out and keep trying. Arts-based research brings that into the research kind of context. And so I'm doing that within a geontologic kind of context, which is thinking about space and place, land, environment, and inhabitants, citizens, diversely in that sense. So the rise in speculative research coincides with the growing influence of feminist theoretical sciences. And feminist theoretical science perspectives have been particularly instrumental because they were the early voices that declared, quote, knowing comes from a direct material engagement with the world, end quote, and that's from Karen Barad. Speculative theories have pushed us to more deeply question our assumptions about thought, knowledge, and matter, and how dominant knowledges are formed and privileged, and how these have maintained the centralizing of particular understandings and interpretations. And Barad has kind of had this meteoric rise of late. She's actually been an incredible researcher and scientist for a very long time. Excuse me, but their work has just recently kind of exploded in a lot of people's, suddenly have become aware of their work. But their premise for their work is that they contest the idea of the privileged position that the white male scientist brings to their work, and that a feminist science project thinks about how knowledge is known or what comes to be held as true before the science even takes place. And that things are neutral until the scientist makes them meaningful. So Barad topples all that, hence their identification as a kind of feminist scientist. And so a critical vision remains a vital and central aspect of speculative research. However, it's also been a catalytic spark, if you like, for the development and experimentation of new methods and methodologies that can work effectively with those theories and prompt greater awareness by researchers of the world. Now you can imagine we've got all this amazing stuff happening with theory and this amazing stuff happening in the sciences. We're exploding our awareness of what's possible. We're understanding more about the world around us, the world in outer space and so on. We're able to, thanks to technology, look at things in the most minute scale, and the slowing down of time, of duration. So we're becoming more aware of what our world is made of and how it's made. And yet we are not expanding our methodologies at the same time. So they're impoverished. So that's what I'm interested in, is how the methodologies need to keep a pace with this incredible, kind of acceleration of exciting research and thought and theory that we're engaging in. So I developed inefficient mapping to visually articulate concepts and ideas embedded in geontologic and speculative theories. And I'm particularly interested in Elizabeth Povinelli's geontologies, the concept of citation by Morin and Willard, Haraway's interspecies kinmaking, Barad's ethics of mattering and interactive entanglements, and Bennett's vibrant matter, to consider the changes to non-inhuman urban lives due to political, environmental, technological, and social shifts in the Anthropocene epoch. And I'm interested in the extraordinary intensities of urban sites and how feminist, geontologic, and speculative thinking helps to disrupt the usual economic reading of the urban in favor of paying attention to ethics and community. So it's just dismantling the human and the kind of the common ways in which we think of environments and places. And I'm talking about the urban here, so I'm talking about built-up areas. I'm not talking about, the bush or the estuary, or, I'm talking about big cities full of buildings, or their suburban sprawl around them. So I'm going to talk a bit more about the details of the method. Inefficient mapping is gestural, and it's a drawn marking, as you can see, that takes place in situ while you're out and about. The mapping can be produced while still or while walking or moving. It's possible to engage technologies such as tablet-based drawing apps, or the mapping can be done using paper and conventional drawing tools. In each instance, the mappings record affective relations within the milieu. If you don't know what the milieu is, that's the kind of everything. The everything that's kind of currently happening. So, to the micro, to the, sub-micro, whatever, and to the enormous. So everything that's in that is is termed the milieu. But in ways that do not emanate from the individual. So it's not about what I determine is in the milieu, it's actually what is already there, even if I can't see it or detect it or have not paid it any attention. So it's not emanating from the human, but through ethically entangling with, observing, and modestly witnessing, which is the term used by Haraway, the moments that I have in a space, or the moments that we occupy in the space. So the mappings are named inefficient because trying to capture everything is impossible and futile. Partial recordings, or what Dennis Wood terms the inefficient map, are maps that do not attempt to include everything, but focus on aspects. And these can record such things as affects, or the diverse interactions in interactivities of matters, times, movements, spaces, and scales. So the inefficient descriptor challenges the kind of conventional research tendencies to think of technocratic or deterministic research methods as kind of bona fide or neutral or untainted, because of course they aren't. They never are that. Mapping, rather than other forms of recording, such as a running record or a video recording, is a non-representational accounting. Now this is, I know it's tricky probably to get your head in this space. But in being non-representational, it notices some of what goes on without claiming to represent a truthful or whole account of the place. So although the maps do not navigate space in the ways that conventional wayfinding maps do, they navigate through non-representational means. That is through things like affect, so your response or your sense or your feeling, through politics, through memories, histories, and the maker of the maps can use them actually to know a space through these non-representational modes. So all the ones you're seeing are maps that I've made so far, and I know exactly where I took them. I know, and I could go back to that spot. Okay, so they are a wayfinding map for me. Experimental drawing is not new, of course. The Surrealists, for example, created automatic drawings. The mapping is not like automatic drawing, however. The ideas and reasons for doing the mapping do not appear spontaneously or unpredictably as a drawing is produced. Neither do they tap into a subliminal or dream state, which is what the Surrealists were interested in. The motivations and contexts for the maps are carefully considered and theorized prior to the mapping taking place. The location and the aspects of that location that are to be mapped have relevance to the research, like they're chosen for a reason, and the conceptual frames informing the research. The premise of the mapping method is to produce a gestural drawn account of a phenomena or location whilst the reasons for the mapping are foregrounded in the mind, and that these remain foregrounded in the mind throughout the process. So at no point is this just kind of brainless work, okay? Consequently, the mappings are not observational drawings, clearly. Yeah? But they are a theorized, gestural, visual, and partial, hence the inefficient, accounts of a research field event. And the graphic orientation of the inefficient mappings allows for visual notation of schizoactivity. These are the overlapping, simultaneous, and multiple movements, forms, and elements that are occurring irrespective of human presence. So they actually make that obvious. They make that obvious because they are so inefficient. They make it very clear that the human cannot capture everything and the human cannot be at the center of things. There's no step-by-step instruction for drawing the maps, except to say a map is created by drawing without looking at the drawing surface. Okay? So none of these drawings were made like this. They're actually all made like this. Okay? The map is generated by looking up, observing, witnessing, whilst making marks that record the movements of the things seen. Hence, they're gestural. It's a kind of replication of the things that you're noticing. So there's no step-by-step instruction, similarly to other arts-based or experimental methods that push widely held assumptions of what a methodological process is, or what it can be. So I developed this particular mapping technique to complement theories that disrupt conventional ideas of research and that are questioning the dominant ontologies that have been central to research in the West. Inefficient mapping critically resists ideas of repetition and troubles the idea of method being reliant on a procedural regularity that is trustworthy because of the regularity, which is a preoccupation. Any of you who are doing studies are probably wrestling with that right now. So the method, however, has a processual habit, but not to the point of having the exact same steps each time. Maps can be created differently and are not restricted by material or technology, as you've seen in some of these examples. I've made paper-based maps in different sizes from A5 to this one, that one, and this one. These are 1.5 meters long by 60 centimeters wide. And they can go smaller and larger still. scale can affectively and effectively impact on the mapping. For example, scale can facilitate collaborative mapping, such as between adults and children. I'll just scoot forward. There's a child doing one. Here. Humans and animals, humans and weather. Yes, Claire, these are the urban activators. And I'll just scoot back to this one. This one was done with rain. So I was outside in the rain, and the rain was coming down over the paper as this was being created. So the paper-based mapping can also be produced over different time scales, particularly if non-human participants are contributing. So this might include leaving the maps in a location to record the markings made by non-human participants. An important aspect of the inefficient mapping is to layer the maps. These are layered. You might not be able to tell that right now, but either digitally through a drawing app that puts in layers, or materially by drawing the maps on tracing film and stacking them. So these are actually a number of layers of maps stacked. Drawn maps can be layered in different and random ways, and in fact should be. And this is to contest the idea of trustworthiness. And technology-based mapping allows for different layering techniques, but it also allows for animations to be woven in. And some drawing apps have an animation of the creation sequence, which is quite interesting. And will show the map from beginning to end. And technology-produced maps can also be generated across programs. And this allows for maps created in situ in one app to be migrated into another program that can further grow the map through animations. So you can see how it starts to have different applications. However, layering is an important curatorial process for documenting movement, and to see how some details start to disappear or fade out under the layers. And of course, that then ties into some of the theorizations around politics, power, scale, noticing human centricism, and all those kinds of things. That plays out in that layering process. And at this point, you might be asking what can be done with these maps once they're produced. Well, the maps are variously accessible. They are highly functional to the person who created them, because they reconnect the person to the place where the map was created. The inefficient mapping technique is also flexible enough to have different forms of functionality, such if a researcher were to use marks or codes in the maps, so they can have certain things that are kind of woven into the maps if needed be. So this method interrogates the habits of research. This includes the habit of conflating, this is really important, of conflating method and data. So there's a wealth of excellent scholarship that considers what data has come to mean in contemporary research. And this includes the work of Erin Manning, Eve Tuck, Marcia McKenzie, Kathleen Stewart, Betty St. Pierre, as well as non-representational methodologists such as Stephanie Springay, Philip Vanini, and Derek McCormack, and many others. I'm informed by this scholarship. The maps methodologically activate concepts and ideas, and also intentions and interests in relation to specific projects and phenomena. Maps are produced as a consequence of the mapping, and these have a functional use to the researcher in terms of being records of site visits and fieldwork. Inefficient mapping can also become data if a researcher were to adapt them to that purpose. The mappings might be partial, but they hone in on what conventionally can be regarded as unimportant, unsightly, or a problem in the urban context. Things about a place that spoil the neighborhood. The mappings are driven by affect, but within our faulty capacity to turn, to look, to see, to mark, and accurately record everything. And this is why it's important to understand the difference between method and data. We hardly we do hardly any justice to capturing everything, but actually that's the ethics of it. Our presence in a place is not crucial or even remotely relevant often. We are just one small being in a vast urban community, ethically moving and playing together. So these last images are of various, the first few were maps that I have done. These are early childhood teachers in Brisbane experimenting with the method, and these are some of the marks that they made on cartridge paper. So we only had a very short time. It was a conference workshop, but they were very game to come outside and test the method with these little tiny chapbooks that I showed them how to make out of one sheet of paper. And this image there is of a young child mapping near the local creek. More of the teachers. And this is what we're going to do. Not necessarily lay on the floor, sorry. But the one on the left there is using the murmuration and people mapping with the murmuration, and we're going to layer them, but we're just going to lay them on the floor. Okay, so we're going to do a kind of, I've got all the materials, and so this is a kind of curation of how the mapping actually makes these layerings and these other configurations. And collectively, we're going to think about some of the points I've raised. What we're going to do is watch the murmuration video in its full length. It's 10 minutes long, and that will give you plenty of time to actually try and not look at your paper, but actually try and use the observation to kind of think about movement and the pulsing and the swooping and the things that you're seeing in that murmuration as it takes place. And there are a number of different murmurations that I've spliced together into this one video. The idea is not to look at all at your paper, but just to kind of gesturally respond to the things that you're seeing in the murmuration and these kind of bird collaboratories as they're flying across the sky. So, and these are, I will mention these just before we get on to that. This is work that this is the main reason I'm in Auckland, is to work with Claire Battersby and Carol Brown. I don't know if Carol's here, I can't see without the specs. I think Carol's a bit busy, but Carol Brown is also University of Auckland in dance, and we are doing a project on children's relationships to the urban environment through dance and mapping. So this is some of the work that the children did last year in Auckland with chalk directly on the surface of the urban site that we were in. And water, you can see water mapping as well. We had a lot of fun washing this off at the end. Okay, so what we'll do is I will give sections out, and if you can pass one along and just grab a piece of film, and I'll also pass, if you have a pencil on you, you can use a pencil, and just everyone take one. You want to hand out, if there might not be enough for everyone, if we'll try and hand out as many, but if you have your own pencil, then maybe we might help to make sure the numbers, everybody gets one. Do you have a pencil or no? That's all right. Oh, you want? You need one? You've got one? Does anybody else need a pencil? Yeah? You've got some, you need more paper? No, that's fine. I've got some more sheets. You've got one there. If not, we might have to resort to pens. You've got one? Okay. More paper? Yeah, I think Marek's got it up the top there. So what you're going to produce are very scratchy lines, okay? But I'm going to challenge you to try not to look at your paper at any point, okay? Because what that does is it immediately draws your attention to a picture, okay? But actually what your main thing is to do is to look at the movements of the starlings, okay? So I really want you to be very, very harsh on yourself and forbid yourself to look at your paper for the duration of the video, okay? You will be a bit confused at first because this is a way of looking that you probably don't do very much. So I do suggest perhaps spending the first 15 or 20 seconds just watching and getting a sense of the movement, all right? And I don't want you to go, well, how do I even look at that movement? You just try and move your hand and your arm in the ways that, try and make your hand and arm move in the ways that your eye is moving, or try and capture some of the movements that you're seeing, all right? And don't worry about what your image will look like. It won't be a picture as you've seen. But what will be interesting is when we come to put them all together and layer them and curate them on the floor to actually build these bigger collections of images. Okay, I'm just going to take this back to the beginning. It's only 8 minutes long, so it's not a long... And there's no sound.
Okay. So, if you were good, you probably haven't had a glimpse yet. So the next thing to do is to bring your mapping, and we're going to place them, probably not everybody at once, but maybe row by row or something, that we come down and we just place them, and you just place it on top or adjacent to, and we'll make the curation of all the mappings, because the layering is really important. So as you come to place yours on, perhaps you can think about how it interrelates to some of the marks of a different map that is space. So we'll have a kind of all arrangement on the floor, okay? So if you want to come and do that. Thank you. And this is an important part of the process, so it needs to be thoughtful, okay? Oh, so they need to go kind of not alongside, but layering them on top of each other, maybe partially or wholly. So, yes, that's right. Thank you. You might put one directly on top, or leave another one. Won't move them. You'll be able to sort of take a photo before we get it.
I'm used to Speculative, for those who don't know who I am. Linda and I have been following each other on Facebook for a few years now.
Yeah, we
I
have.
can't even remember where we first met.
No, I can't. Probably a conference of...
We're so young, it's so unusual that we can't remember. But it's just so exciting to have you here in Aotearoa with us, and thanks, Eric, for inviting me to come and speak. And wow, so I'm going to sort of just speak for a little tiny bit, but I really want to hear from you. I sat there with my pen because we've run out of pencils, and I just loved it. I love that sort of stuff, you know. It's like, yes, get to play. Gosh, it was hard not to look. Did anyone glimpse? I found myself looking before I realised I was looking at one stage, which was really sad. I was hoping you didn't see me. just to let go and respond, that's another thing that I found really, really hard. Because I thought, well, I'm sure there's a spiral in there, maybe I could do a koru. You know, you start to imagine what it could look like instead of letting it actually tell you. So that, I mean, I really enjoyed that process, and I've got some I can't keep up with you. I needed to be recording it, and it was just all this beautiful language that was coming out of, you know, as you spoke. So I just loved it. And that thing here, one small being in an urban community, ethically moving and playing together. You know, there's just so much that you said. I'm going to have to go back. I was going to do a found poem, but I'll have to do it later once I have a chance to go through. The idea of looking up, you know, I think that's just so important. These days I have to remind myself sometimes in our work to remember to look up. And I just that simple phrase, but it's just so important in the work that we do. And I've got here for you today, you are a spark coming into our presence, and you were talking about the catalytical spark, that we need new methods and theory. Well, you're our spark. So coming in here today and giving us this talk and engaging us and drawing without looking. So thank you for coming and being that spark. So I'm going to open up to some comments and responses and some questions.
How do you see it happening? How do you see it keep happening in different ways? Or
what's the it?
That cut between methodology and data.
Yeah.
Like, how do you separate them out?
Well, that's a tricky one because, you know, for many people there's not the separation. But I think when you make an artifact, or when you make an object, there is a kind of propensity to treat that as the kind of data evidence. And so I'm trying to avoid people falling into that kind of assumption about what these are. So these are the methodology, but they can also be data if the person so chooses. But as you can see, they're kind of, because of our conservatisms around data, it would be hard to organise them in the way that we organise other things, other bits of evidence into, you know, percentages or narrative responses or interview transcripts, or, you know, it's very hard to organise this stuff into something that is conventionally acceptable as data. And so, as I was trying to say in the presentation, it can be that if the researcher chooses it to be that, but it's actually a methodology for thinking through those kind of theorizations, ideas, the speculations. And it's a way into a research project or into a kind of an act of researching, if you like, that then furthers knowledge. So I guess the bigger question underlying perhaps yours is what needs to be research, or what do we count as research? Is research data-driven, or can it be something else? If you asked an artist, do they conduct research? They would invariably say, yes, I do, but they don't produce data. They go about things, and they actually engage in a series of processes and habits and artifact generating, you know, activities, if you like. And those artifacts could be physical, like a piece of art, but they could also be a piece of music. They could be sonal, or it could be kind of embodied, like a dance, for example. So research to me is about furthering our understandings of things, furthering our knowledge, and growing in an intellectual sense, but through all these different things. So we have come to see that data is responsible for that growth, but perhaps it isn't always. And so I can't kind of essentialize it into a cut. Because to me, it isn't particularly data, but it can be if a person chose for it to be data. But I don't think research needs to have data, you know, if that answers your question. Yeah. It's a tricky one because we are so embedded and wedded to data as in need, you know, for it to be termed research. But in fact, there are many people in the world that do research without engaging in data production or data reading, data analysis.
Experience of doing it was quite pleasant, and I thought a lot about the actual birds and how they were forming shapes. To me, it was something like they're investigating about memories held in water. And it was almost like the birds were doing a dance that was their memory, and bees do that. So that was happening for me. It was extremely frustrating being in 2 dimensions to record the feeling.
Yeah.
But most of all, I just think that this is what babies and children do when they're free. They just talking with their pencil, and then if you ask them, they tell you the whole journey. And it's not about the product.
That's right. And we.
So that's what I got out of it.
Yes, and it's a very astute observation because particularly we've given terms to those marks, and historically we've called them scribbles, which is a terrible disservice because they're actually some of the most intelligent marks that young children make because they are purely gestural and cerebral, and to kind of diminish them as something that we do when our pen won't work is a terrible disservice. And so they, in a way, those early marks, you're exactly right, they are gestural, they're a very, very close relationship to the child's experience of being alive and encountering the world. And I would say they're some of their most potent drawings.
Yes, and it's how we respond.
Yeah.
People around.
They might not have recognisable schema in them, but in fact, it's a shame that we've reversed our understanding of what's going on because they are really, really excellent kind of marks in response to the world that young children make. So it's hard to learn, isn't it? It's hard to kind of take up and do that instantly. It does take a little bit of practice, but I think the learning to do that kind of close observation with something else going on is it takes a bit of time, but it can be. I don't know how people felt about that. I know you.
I have a question. Inevitably, they're quite subjective, each individual piece. So why would you have a group layer those into a symbiosis?
The curatorial process I think, is really important because we're talking about community in this particular presentation, and we're talking about building understandings of different readings of community members, so human, non-human, animal, matter, and they're all at play in this. So there's all that stuff going on in this. So it's about how this process can actually engage us in kind of theoretical thinking and critical thinking about some of those issues through this kind of curatorial process. And so it's a methodology, right? So it's a methodology for sparking, for thinking, for furthering how we understand something or how we might want to understand something, and that to me that's a good outcome for that methodology, for this methodological event.
Yeah, so to me, as I think we're all individuals in here, and we're all responding to the beautiful sort of bird dance. And the weird thing, I don't know if anyone else saw the sea worm that they've just discovered in the ocean, that giant thing. It made me think of that because there were many times when those individual birds look like one, you know, and then all of a sudden you'd see one of them sort of take off and do something different.
Yeah.
And we've all experienced that as individuals, but we're coming together as one in the mapping, you know, so it very much it represented the dance itself. There's individuals there, but yet they were often one, you know, the way they moved or looked like one.
Yeah, and also the curatorial process helps us to think about this notion of arrangements and the impacts and how things disappear. So there is an aesthetic aspect to that. And that's because it's an arts-based methodology. So the arts is in there, you know, and it's part of that process. And it's how an arts practice helps to kind of prompt things that are maybe, you know, a kind of a very different kind of frame of thinking, not necessarily about the arts, but the arts is helping us think through some of those things. And so this arts process, which includes this kind of curatorial, and we did this very quickly. It would take, you know, it would be nice to play with that a bit more. And it's actually really good to do it. Oh, I haven't got the slide up, but you probably saw some images of put them on a sunny window, so you could see through the layers, and that was great. And people were like, we just left them up, and people moved them around all week, and they grew over the week, and people kind of added to. And so that process through an arts practice of curating is also important for us to think about. It prompts thinking about this issue. And just on the you probably saw the single bird. So starlings, these are starlings. I didn't have sound on this because it wasn't a great recording, but in my childhood in Europe, I experienced starling murmurations, and it's deafening. It's like screeching, and it's en masse. And the sound pulses as they move around the sky and go backwards and forwards and come down closer to the ground and then go up in the sky again. But it's a strategy of survival, like mongoose. So mongoose behave in a pack way to appear larger. They appear like they're the same size as a cat, like a wild cat. And it's to stop their predators attacking them, because they think there's a big thing in the grass when it's actually lots of little mongoose moving fluidly together. And they appear and disappear, and they give an appearance of a much larger animal. And the starlings do the same. So the bird that was flying into them was a bird of prey. So it was trying to grab one of the starlings. And what was happening is it couldn't, because they were moving around it like this. And it couldn't, it was disoriented. As soon as it flew in, they would just part like this kind of fluid gel or liquid. And so animals do that as a survival mechanism. If it had been a single starling, that kite, I think it's a kite, would not have had an issue with picking it off. But it kind of disoriented the kite's ability to hone in on a prey. So it's a survival mechanism. And animals do use this kind of fluid movement, collective movement, and we learn a lot. So this process of mapping brings us into that awareness through doing an arts-based kind of method of closely observing.